Hey guys, welcome back to the Scavenge-ology podcast. This is your host, Elena. I'm so excited to have you joining us today for another episode where we are covering our ingredient label deep dive series and diving in to another ingredient that you probably frequently see on ingredient labels once you start looking, but you may not know much about now. So I'm really excited to have you listening in, and I want to take a second to say thank you. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Primal Rock. You can also check out our website at primalrockgroceryhouse.com. We would love to connect with you over on social media and also have you learn more about our amazing brands and products that we have on our site that are always completely clean and do not contain these ingredients that we share about on the deep dive. So thank you for listening in and for being a part of our community. We are really excited to get to know more about this ingredient today. So if you've ever heard of the letters MSG, you may know that they are usually an ingredient people are not very excited about consuming. You may see it on food labels as does not contain MSG or no MSG, but you may not really know what MSG is. And I remember back being a teenager and I had no idea what MSG meant, obviously. It's not really a common thing you study in high school. And I was hanging out with a few of my cousins and we were going to grab some dinner. And one of my friends said that we could not order from a local Chinese restaurant because she was allergic to the MSG in their food. And clearly, I had no idea what this meant, besides the fact that she said she had a food allergy. But now that I work, in the food industry, and I am way more well versed in what different ingredients mean, MSG is something that I am pretty familiar with, but also did a little bit more research on. So you can always go over to the Primal Rock Grocery House website and read our blog posts. I'll reference a few different studies and a few different things. And if you prefer to see the written version, you can go over to the site and go to the blog on Writings on the Wall, and you can read the pretty much written version of the podcast and see the studies and the different links that we have there. We are going to cover all of the same information today here on the podcast. So, formerly known as monosodium glutamate, MSG has been linked with obesity and metabolic disorders and something called Chinese restaurant syndrome. We'll get into that in a second. It also is linked to neurotoxic effects and has also been linked to having really bad effects on reproductive organs. So let's touch on Chinese restaurant syndrome, since I just talked about my personal when I first heard about what MSG was and started uncovering that it could be a problem for some people. Chinese restaurant syndrome is a set of symptoms people have after eating food with MSG. And since MSG is a very common ingredient used in Chinese restaurants for different foods with sodium and things like that, they ended up calling it Chinese restaurant syndrome. And it is defined in the dictionary as a group of symptoms such as numbness of your neck, arms, back, with headache, dizziness, and palpitations that is held to affect susceptible persons eating food, and especially Chinese food, heavily seasoned with monosodium glutamate. So it does sound like an ingredient you would not be very excited to consume, but just like with anything, everyone's body is so different and will have different effects from different ingredients. So just because Chinese restaurant syndrome is a term people use for being sensitive to MSG, it does not mean that all Chinese restaurants use MSG. It does not mean that there aren't Italian restaurants or other different foods that don't use MSG. It just sometimes is more frequently used in these foods with soy sauce and with high sodium and things like that. So how is MSG made? You may think, well, there is natural MSG, which is true. There is natural MSG in things like tomatoes, but it's not the same MSG that is manufactured and dangerous to our bodies. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, we talk about them often here. They shared that it is made by extracting and crystallizing MSG from seaweed broth. So MSG is produced then by the fermentation of starch, sugar beets, sugar cane, or molasses. So the fermentation process is similar to how they make yogurt, vinegar, and wine. That's according to the FDA. So, after there were so many years of reports to the FDA of symptoms after consuming foods with MSG, like headaches, nausea, all these different symptoms we just went over, they decided to act and to do a little study. So, they called on a scientific group called the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology to examine the safety of MSG. This is back in the 90s. So, FASEB is what they go for short. Their report concluded that MSG is indeed safe. So the FDA came back and cited that the FASEB report identified some short-term, transient, generally mild symptoms like headache, numbness, flushing, tingling, palpitations, and drowsiness that can occur in sensitive individuals who consume 3 grams or more of MSG without food. However, they shared that a typical serving of food with added MSG contains less than 0.5 grams of MSG. So if you think back to our first ingredient level or ingredient label deep dive, we shared the effects of consuming safe amounts and daily values, right? And you can think back to our study that we talked about on aspartame and how some people can consume certain amounts of the daily value of aspartame, but it's really easy to go over those certain amounts if you are consuming lots of foods within a day that contain aspartame. So it's very similar with MSG. So they're giving these really low numbers of what is safe to consume. But most often, people are not just going into a Chinese restaurant or to any restaurant or buying any product on the shelf and seeing how much of my daily value of MSG is within this product, right? So more often than not, if someone's eating a very highly processed diet, they are going to be consuming more MSG than they should. So MSG has landed on its banned ingredients list here at Primal Rock. These symptoms that we're sharing are not symptoms, even though they're described as mild by the FDA and all these different research studies. These symptoms are not something that you want to be experiencing after you consume a food, right? These are not symptoms that we would consider normal or healthy after you're eating a meal. Why would you want to eat a meal that, even though, mild symptoms, you might get numbness or a headache, or you might get dizziness, heart palpitations? Why would we want to put these foods into our bodies? Like I shared, everyone is sensitive to different levels. So some people can eat probably a ton of this ingredient and have no reaction, whereas some people can consume such a small amount and have a serious reaction, like in my case with my family member who was allergic to MSG. And granted, when I say allergic, it sounds more to me now that I have more research under my belt that she wasn't actually having a food allergy. It was more just she was very sensitive to MSG. So we have MSG on our banned ingredients list. You can always go reference our banned ingredients list on our website. But we believe here at Primal Rock that MSG should be spared from the food products that we consume. But unfortunately, you cannot steer clear of MSG just by avoiding your late night fried rice order with soy sauce, or avoiding, certain products at the grocery store, certain aisles. Unfortunately, MSG is in several foods that we consume. Quick meals like lean cuisines, Campbell's soup, Doritos, Cool Ranch Doritos to be specific, and even some salad dressings contain MSG. So when you flip over the ingredient labels, we always suggest here at Primal Rock to read your ingredient labels. That's why we're doing this series right now. But you can either find it referenced as MSG or its actual longer name, monosodium glutamate. So there are a few photos on our website, on our blog, where we have referenced the ingredient labels for these products, a few of the products that contain MSG. And there's also a few other names MSG can be under. So we've talked about natural flavors and what natural flavors means. Turns out that can be, a hidden place where they hide secret MSG in foods. It can be, in certain protein powders that you wouldn't expect. It can be called yeast extract. It can be included in hydrolyzed proteins, autolyzed yeast, and sodium caseinate. So we have several places on our site where you can see the different names for where MSG could be in your food. So before you heat up, a nice bowl of soup, maybe turn over and check that ingredient label to read about the actual ingredients and what goes into those. So, how can you protect yourself and your family from consuming MSG? So, like I just shared, you always want to be reading your labels. Salad dressing is not a place where you would expect to find something like MSG, right? But it's very often there. So, you always need to be checking the ingredient labels of your foods, of your drinks, of your dressings, whatever product it is. You wouldn't expect this to be, in a bag of chips, right? These are all places where we do find MSG. So you can also take this a step further by shopping at clean grocery stores. So we've shared this before, shopping with stores like our online grocery store, Primal Rock, Whole Foods, places, Fresh Market, places where ingredients are very important to the grocery store that you are shopping at, and that they have a higher commitment to ingredient labels that are actually good for you. And as we talked about, lean cuisine, even though that's a really quick and easy option for people who live a fast paced life and are always on the go, MSG really isn't worth the convenience of that meal. So we are also launching soon our Meals to Thrive program, which is very exciting here at Primal Rock. And this program will provide safe and healthy meals for your whole family, no matter what type of diet you need to adhere to. And we're really excited that these will be really quick and easy, ready to make and ready to heat up meals that won't have these harmful ingredients like MSG. So there's always ways that you can limit your consumption of these ingredients, paying attention and be willing to learn more about what is really in your foods, especially foods from restaurants and takeout foods, frozen foods, and foods that are really quick and simple and easy. Sometimes those are the most dangerous, but they don't have to be. So that's why we're really excited about what we're doing here at Primal Rock, to have the opportunity to show people and teach people that, just because it's quick and easy, it can also be healthy and it can also be good for you. So just be out there reading your ingredient labels, paying attention to what you're putting into your body, paying attention to all of these different food and ingredient labels on different products that you're picking up at the grocery store. Obviously, when you're ordering from a restaurant, you really don't have a way of knowing every single ingredient that they include, but do some research and find foods that, often include MSG or whatever other harmful ingredient. And if you have consumed foods that contain this ingredient and then you've started to experience symptoms, maybe start to think about that a little bit more of, what could these symptoms be really telling me about my body and about my health and about what I may be more sensitive to. You can find all this information as I shared on our blog, but thank you so much for listening in with us and hope to have you back next time for our next episode.